at those folks. Clayton, ST, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hey guys, how's it going? I love the fact that you have an Asajj Ventress correspondent, and Trina's the best person for that.
If we've learned anything from you, it's that we need people that are experts that can go out, can do the hard work, tell the good stories.
That's awesome. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's. I think the last time I actually saw you was probably at Celebration, not too long ago. 2 years ago now. Jeez Louise, it's going way too fast. I can't believe I said jeez Louise. See, that's the problem. I'm getting a little bit too old on that stuff. But yeah, Clayton, ST, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who may not have met you before?
Clayton?
She's more famous than I am, so
no. So I write a lot of kids and some young adult and some entertainment type stuff for Star Wars, Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and the Jim Henson Company, all of the Disneys. I love Star Wars. I'm a huge fan. I have slept in the floor in convention center basements. There is no greater love than that. And I'm just really excited to get to work with Clayton because I've really admired his work for a long time. And of course, just seeing how he is as a collaborator was a really cool experience for me. So this was a real treat.
Awesome.
Totally mutual. Yeah. And I working for Scripps News now, but for years as sort of, I call it my side hustle, try to report on fun and interesting behind the scenes Star Wars kind of stuff, and worked on Timelines, which was out last year, and this one, which is coming out soon, and very, very excited about all of it. So
yeah, this isn't like just a book. This is, I have to say, okay, so yeah, before we dig into it, this is 300 pages. I did my shorts / TikTok video and literally dropped it on the table, and it was loud. I have been collecting Star Wars books, as you have, Clayton, for years, and I'm sure you too, ST. But like way back to like when the only thing you could get because you didn't have it on video was books. And I'm not saying this because you're on screen. This book is so worthy of being among the top of those books. This thing, top to bottom, is fantastic. It's got just the picture. I mean, I'm not going to do it justice here, but it's got pictures. It's got like sections within sections. It's so well put together. It's built so well. And we also can't forget to mention that Kelly Knox was one of your co-authors on this. Kelly, the only reason she's not with you tonight is because she's going to be here next week because she's busy putting out other books like her Dad Jokes book. But that's it's just an amazing book. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Well, and I want to dig into that because, like you said, it is a 300-page book, and it boggles the mind. And I've had books like this. We've had, it's got the fold outs, it's got all the, kind of additional. Where do you begin with a project like this? Like, how do you get started and not just sit down in the middle of the room and go, there's too much? Like, tell us about kind of the process of it, because I love a good behind the scenes, and this is certainly something that there's a lot of meat on those bones. Where do you start with this?
Well, we were really lucky. We had some amazing editors that we got to work with that had created these drives, I guess, like compendium drives of here are a lot of materials that you can use to research from. So I think most of us just kind of combed through very slowly, combed through the drives and pulled out what we could. I'm old school. I just do it on a Word doc and kind of plugged in by section what we would need to know, and then essentially tried to pull out the most interesting facts from those sections. Was it similar for you, Clayton?
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about the editors who were very smart about, dividing things up. So we each had kind of our own section that we were responsible for, which what's cool about that is that going through this, when I got my copy, there were sections I hadn't read other people's sections. So there were things in here that I didn't know that I learned once I finally got my hands on it, which was great. And it's sort of it's kind of like, it's a visual archive, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Are we talking about the movie? Are we talking about behind the scenes. And the fact is, it's like this, and again, credit to the editors, it's this brilliantly put together hybrid of both, because we'll talk about the story, so you'll understand what's going on in the movie, and then in that same section we just kind of dive into all the behind the scenes aspects of it, and then sort of the overall thing, which I think makes it a little bit different from what has come before, is it kind of takes Return of the Jedi and shows you how that film continues to influence Star Wars to this day. And there's a million examples we can talk about, but that's one of the things I really love about it.
Yeah, I think that was another great thing about what I saw with this book, was just the, you talk about the merch, you talk about the connections to the Ewok shows, you talk about the blurgs showing up in Mandalorian and all those sort of conversations. So what was maybe the most surprising thing that you learned while you were putting this book together? Like one of the facts that you're like, I had no idea.
I didn't know that the Ewok actors were such pranksters on the set. Maybe this was common knowledge and I just had not quite come across this panel at a celebration yet. But apparently they really, really enjoyed pranking their co-stars and the crew, and they would just disappear and say they weren't coming into work that day, and then ambush the person that came looking for them in the woods. Or I guess one day the crew and the cast were all eating lunch, and so they attacked them with water balloons when they weren't looking. Like, they just had so much fun. And I think that really comes across on the screen when you see those sequences in particular, is these people just really all enjoyed working together because they were allowed to make it a fun environment.
That's cool. Yeah, we actually had Nick, I can't remember his name. Kevin Thompson, right? He was one of the Ewoks. Yeah. He was on the show, and he told us his story about, he didn't know for sure that he was working on Star Wars until he went up the elevator at Pinewood Studios, I guess it was, and he walked out and he saw Billy D, he saw Carrie Fisher, he saw Luke Skywalker, and he said, "Oh, we're making Star Wars." So, but he also told us about how, they wrestled and they just had so much fun together. That's a great call. I love that. What about you, Clayton? What shocked you, or what did you learn?
I think it was just all the connections that you don't really often think about. And one example that sort of stood out to me is take Mon Mothma. And I'm going to ask you guys, how long do you think Mon Mothma's monologue was in Return of the Jedi?
Like, as far as like the number of lines or minutes or
minutes? Yeah. Okay. How many minutes?
It feels like it's like 3 or 4 minutes, right? Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say it's 3. It feels like 3 minutes of screen.
3 minutes. Yeah. She speaks for 38 seconds, and then she appears in a few more scenes.
Right.
But then that's it. Mm-hmm. And yet that character, and this is the contribution that Return of the Jedi makes, is that she goes on to appear in animated series,
right?
Rogue One. She's one of the chief characters of Andor, and I think that's one of the really neat, enduring contributions that Jedi makes to the canon is characters like Mon Mothma. And the other character connection, which I thought was a lot of fun, is just the skiff guards in the Sarlacc scene. They're just sort of background bad guys that end up getting thrown into the Sarlacc pit. And now the Weequays and the Niktos and all the others are like named common characters throughout all kinds of Star Wars stories. So I think it was just the connections that are made, from one of the really minor things in Jedi end up being these, important, enduring elements years and years later to this day.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it that way, but it's really interesting because I've always said that The Empire Strikes Back was the most important Star Wars movie because it started to build the lore, right, of the Force and all these other things. But I hadn't thought about what you just said, but you're right. These background characters, because I guess there were more. I mean, you had the cantina in A New Hope, but that was kind of, quick. But all these background characters that ended up having a big impact far beyond and far before Return of the Jedi. That's a really great observation. That is really very interesting. So
it's there, and there's so much of it, and you see the little bits of it, like you talked about, all the little bits, whether it's the blurgs, whether it's, getting to see vehicles again farther down the line, like all those little things that feed into animation, that feed into these furthering of stories. My question for you guys next is, I'm not a huge rank Star Wars guy, but I know we all, have movies that we watch where we connect. So this is kind of a two-parter. One, where was Return of the Jedi initially for you, kind of in the overall Skywalker saga? And did working on this book and doing this kind of change the way you look at this movie in particular?
Well, Empire is my favorite. It's my favorite. It's still my favorite. I got to visit Hoth once upon a time, and it was even more my favorite. And I think for me, every time I work on a project, I feel closer to that film. So coming in, I would have said my number was 5, 4, and 6 tied, and then others, right? I would bring 6 slightly above now because I have had that connection with it. I've worked on 4 projects, but this was really in depth and this was really fun. So it brings it a little higher in that ranking just because I know more, I understand more. I've always loved the Ewoks, so it was always going to be up there anyway. But just learning that lore and those things that we didn't know before really, I think, helps me understand and appreciate it even more.
Yeah, I don't think anything will ever top Empire for me, but it's true. When you start digging into all of this stuff for Jedi, it's hard not to have a deeper appreciation and affinity for it, because you really do see how it influenced things that came later. There was also I was thinking about the connection to even the prequels. The planet Coruscant was basically completely designed by Ralph McQuarrie for Jedi, and then that planet got cut from the script, so they had all this stuff left over. So when Doug Chiang and team went to design Coruscant for the Phantom Menace, he says, I didn't really have to do much work. McQuarrie already did it. So, yeah, I don't know. I would probably rank it a very close second to Empire at this point.
And I think that's an interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this project coming kind of on the heels of Light and Magic is so interesting for us too, because we got to see so many of the things that we were reading about, like playing out in the filmography of what they were showing during those scenes from Light and Magic, seeing Warren Peterson and Dennis Muren and all of these speeder bike sequences and the animatics. Like, it was just really neat to do the research and then get this visual of, oh, I understand this is what they were doing, and realizing how just truly pioneering all of that was for the time. It was fun to kind of have that crossover between the series and the research.
That makes all the sense in the world. And I think there's a unique thing with Jedi, and I think this book is going to do a lot, not only for fans. I mean, we're all of the same age, I think, and we all, kind of rank Empire as number one, and, kind of follow that original OT path and then into the other stuff, which we also love. But I think there's something in the fact that Star Wars came out of left field in 1977. Nobody was prepared for how big it was going to be, the phenomenon that was going to be. Then Empire came, and our minds were blown, and it was this new thing. But by the time we got to Jedi, it was more familiar, and so it had to work a little bit harder to be something special and keep it going. And I think it did. But I think we look at, especially fans of our age and our generation, we look at Jedi a little bit differently. And I think the more we revisit it as older fans, we look at it and go, gosh, that really is great. And more so than we thought. And I think a book like this revisits that idea and shows us more of the, oh yeah, that moment. And oh yeah, this, I remember, the animatics of the speeder bike scene that showed up in all those behind the scene videos that we got on VHS, in the late 80s and that kind of stuff. Like, all of that comes flooding back. And when you see a book like this that just reminds you of that, I think that's a neat connection that also has the ability to reel in these younger fans who also love Return of the Jedi, but for different reasons than maybe the four of us do.
Yeah. And I also think about Doug Chiang talks, and I can't remember where this one was. I think it was pretty recent, but he talks about the steepness of ramps, right? In all of these, have we talked about this before? There's this steepness of ramps, and how steep does it have to be for the shuttle to get down and the people to get down it? And Jedi in particular had a steepness of ramp moment that like really brought that full circle to me. I guess when they were doing reshoots for the landing platform on Endor, David Prowse wasn't available. So one of the ILM gentlemen had to step into the costume, and it was Craig Barron, I think. And he wasn't as tall as David Prowse, which meant that the cape was a lot longer and the costume didn't fit as well. And Vader's helmet wasn't quite what it needed to be. And I think visibility is just difficult anyway. So he's going down a ramp, which was probably steep to begin with, but in order to make it work for these reshoots, it was even steeper than the one they'd originally built. And he said he just bit it. And now I will forever be looking and thinking of Doug's, talk on ramps. And like, even in the Bad Batch, when we're watching that, it's like, oh, is that ramp? Could Hunter really walk down that? Oh, those are little stairs. I see them now. Like little things that make it funny.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's those are the kinds of things that we don't appreciate, I think, as well. I think Star Wars fans appreciate it more, but I think we often forget about it. It's just all the things that went on behind the scenes. And honestly, it's a miracle that Star Wars looks and is as good as it is and was. And it's just, I remember the quote from Ralph McQuarrie when he told George, he said, these look great in paintings, but they're not going to look good on screen. And miraculously, it all worked, and it all became this sort of amazing universe that we all love. Clayton, I know that you are a big fan of these kinds of books, and it's funny. Clinton Yates was a guest on Around the Galaxy from ESPN, and I asked, as we do in every Around the Galaxy, we ask in our 10 questions, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book? And his favorite book is one of yours, and I think you were the only other one to say it, was the Empire Strikes Back Blueprints book.
Oh, yeah.
And so this book, was this sort of, Timelines was an amazing, and still is, it's something I grab all the time. But is this sort of like the dream Star Wars project for you?
Yeah, because I think we've talked before that when Jedi left theaters, we all kind of thought Star Wars was done. And I personally sort of turned to all of the behind the scenes stuff and learning, the first ILM book by Thomas Smith was like, I remember getting that for Christmas one year, and I still have it in the other room and look at it occasionally. And I have a prop. Can I get a prop really quick?
Yes, please, absolutely.
Okay, hold on. All right.
Anything from that back wall would be fine. Oh my gosh.
So what was cool about this was, and I wish that I had gotten this before, because I would have put a picture, I would have submitted a picture for the book, but I got to write a little bit about the Death Star in Jedi, and the fact that actually there were supposed to be 2 Death Stars until they cut one out. But talking about the model building and some of the behind the scenes aspects of that, I got to go to unfortunately, sadly, the closing of 3210 Studios in the fall, which was where ILM had been until they kind of sold off the physical effects part and moved to the Presidio. But in that facility, when I was there, they still had, if you can imagine, the Death Star floors. If I can hold this up,
No,
they still had the templates, the brass, sort of an etched brass piece. Oh, this is what the floors, when you see the girders on the Death Star, this is what it was made out of. These tiny little strips of brass, and so I had, so getting to write about Death Star 2 and getting to see how this actually looked, these tiny little pieces that somebody designed, and then they used acid to kind of wash it away. But this is what the model makers were working with, tiny little pieces and strips of brass to make that model. And so, diving into stuff like that, for me, like you said, it was a total dream to get into that stuff.
Clayton, please frame that.
I need to put it somewhere safe.
Preserve it for all of us. That's right. Well, ST, I want to ask you a question as well. You have kind of, with this book, certainly you've made a move from, YA and fiction and some younger, the books that you've done into more kind of an archival role. What was the toughest part of that transition? Did it flow naturally because you love Star Wars, or was there, some adjustments that had to be made?
It definitely flowed from Star Wars, but also because I really love doing research. That's always my favorite part of any project. So this took the research part and then cut out the making things up from the research part, right? It was just, okay, we're going to skip the second step. We'll just do the first step. The hard part for me was not using my normal language, which is very heavy on alliteration. I love it. I am a big fan of puns. I have learned how to stop having so many stabby type words as we don't say these things, right? So you'll get the notes, oh, we're still owned by Disney. It's not so much stabbing. It's very different writing for like original stories for Insider or a kid's book. Like there's a difference there, but here it was a much drier kind of style. So there was definitely less alliteration. There weren't as many puns. I think we were able to put in a couple little zinger lines here and there, but it was a more serious book. So I was more serious.
Yes, of course,
Yeah, it's funny because as Nick said, and I referenced at the top, until I read your bio, I didn't. The 5-minute Star Wars stories, which you were a part of. I used to read those to my son every night, and
I'm so glad.
I was reading your stuff even before this, and so that's really wild. But the book comes out on April 23rd. It is honestly, I don't say this lightly. It is really, it falls into an immediate favorite of mine personally, and again, Return of the Jedi has always been my number 3 movie, but I read this and I had to go watch the movie. I gotta ask you real quick, have you watched the movie since you finished the book?
I've watched pieces of it.
I'm sure it's been on. I sat down and watched it again. We watch things a lot when we're doing the books, a lot. So sometimes we take little breaks unless we have a project right away that's the same. I don't think I've seen it in its entirety since. So.
Well, I can neither confirm nor deny that I watched it at work today while I was getting ready to hang out with you guys tonight. Sure. But there's a rumor floating around.
That's great. Well, we're going to take a break, and if you guys will hang out, we want to give away some Star Wars toys, Return of the Jedi toys specifically, with a little bit of a trivia game. And if you guys have anything you can add to the trivia questions as they come out, we'd love to hear them from the book. I have put the link in the chat. You can pre-order your book right now on Amazon or wherever you get books, but there's a link right now if you want to go get that book today. So it lands in your front porch on the 23rd of April. You're not going to want to miss a single day with it.